I'm often asked how you go about choosing the right grid. Well, keep in mind that grids offer flexible options. Choosing the right grid makes all the difference in your end design. Choose a grid based on the content and adjust content based on the grid. The right grid offers the designer flexibility without overwhelming them with possibilities. The right grid also enhances organization and makes it easy for the viewer or reader to understand the content. There are no right or wrong grids. They're simply grids that are more suitable for different content and design objectives. Of course, that might not help you that much when you're just staring at a blank page and a deadline. Here's some thinking points to help you plan your grid and your design. Think about the content or page elements. Is the publication heavy on text or heavy on graphics? Will there be many headlines, rules, illustrations, pull quotes? Think about text. Look at both the amount of text and how it is broken down. Long articles or lots of short articles? Are there a mix of long and short articles? How many subheads do you have? Will you use initial caps or other visual clues? Think about photos and illustrations. Are there similarities in the type of illustrations or size of photos? Can photos be grouped by size or type? Are there a lot of rectangular elements or are there many irregularly shaped elements? Think about the complexity of your project. Generally, the larger the number of grid units and the smaller the individual units themselves, the more the design options are available. However, too many options can destroy the underlying unity that the grid provides. So, which grid is best? Well, here's some guidelines, and remember, I'm calling these guidelines, not rules. If you have lots of text with few graphics, such as a book or long chapters with few or no illustrations, then you can use a simpler grid, like a 1 to 3 unit grid perhaps. If you have a newsletter, brochure, or magazine with many photographs, it's usually going to require a grid with smaller units to give more possibilities for placement and for sizing the photographs. Newsletters, because they generally have more text, can often use a column grid. 1, 2, and 3 column grids are very common. Each can accommodate lots of text, especially long articles. 4 or more columns offer greater flexibility for publications with text, photos, and other graphic elements, and a mix of long and short articles. Grids that are based on even number of grid columns can suffer from too much symmetry if text and graphics are confined to individual or double grid columns throughout the piece, so keep that in mind. Newsletters don't have to be tied to a column grid. A newsletter consisting of mostly small articles or news briefs and photos could use a 6-up grid, which is be a 2 by 3, or a 9-up, which is 3 by 3, or perhaps even a 12 up, which is like a 3 by 4, for example, unit grid. So it's going to have 12 units of rectangular or square units, and those things seem to work quite nicely for newsletters. And so here's just a example of some of the grids that we've talked about in the previous lecture. Remember that grids don't have to limit your design. Sometimes people feel that grids are stifling, but they definitely needn't be stifling. Layouts based on grids are not appropriate in all cases. Grids should fix the mix of elements rather than forcing the elements to fit the grid. Elements on your page do not have to be confined to individual grid units. In a 5-column grid, 5 narrow columns of text can be difficult to read. Try 2 columns of text, each spanning 2 grid units with an empty grid unit for accents, photos, breathing room, or adjacent caps. Resize photos to fill 2 or 3 more units of grid space. You don't always have to fill the entire grid unit either. Fill like 2.5 grid units with a photo, leaving some extra white space. Gutters and margins are not off limits. You can definitely bleed photos off the edge of the page. You don't have to fill every little grid unit. The odd column, or in a 5 by 7 column newspaper grid, it can offer extra thumb space along the outer edges. There are many ways to add white space into your designs, and leaving some grid units open is one way. Here we have a article, and this is actually based on more of a 6-column grid, although I've kind of subdivided it into 4 columns because it tends to have a thinner column and then a wider column and a thinner column and a wider column. And you can see when you're looking here how the images, like this image, spans 2 columns. This headline right here and with this little graphic basically spans these 3 columns, which essentially is almost 4 narrow columns. So it's kind of interesting how they mix the information together. The piece visually is very appealing, and they've put a lot of information on the page, and they've been creative in the way that they have gone ahead and mixed the grid units. Sometimes if one grid is good, 2 could be even better. Some publications use mixed grids. A different grid than what is used through most of the publication might be appropriate. This is a great way to present content that varies greatly from the rest of the pages. It's also okay to mix grid systems within the same page. A text-heavy newsletter might group all the photos or illustrations on a single page. The text pages can then just use a simple grid, and the multiple photos might require a more complex arrangement. You could use 2 different grids to differentiate sidebar or secondary items from primary articles. Or you could mix long and short articles in the same publication using a different grid for each. Or you could use different grids for featuring material and regular, reoccurring departments. As with any grid system, use it consistently, let content guide your design, and make your grid a partner in your page layout, not a dictator. Have fun with the grids. They will help your design, but it's okay to break the grids too. You don't have to be stifled by them.